Welcome to Post-Traumatic Thriving, where we explore life's toughest issues along with the art, science, and stories of resilience. Please be advised that our guests share their raw stories of addiction, abuse, crime, and tragedy, along with tips to survive and thrive. And now, here is our host, Dr. Randall-Bell.
Hello, welcome back to Post-Traumatic Thriving. I am your host, Dr. RandallBell, and I am here with Dr. Mark Goulston, who is a professor from UCLA in psychology, psychiatry, a medical doctor, has written a number of books, has added so many nice dimensions to an already well-developed field of medicine and psychology and psychiatry. But what Dr. Mark is bringing to the table, although I've studied this stuff for quite some time in order to write Post-Traumatic Thriving, are entirely new dimensions that I'm just a big fan of, and I know everyone else is too, that will listen. The thing is about this podcast is we often have guests that have been through horrific traumas, and we've kind of gone through the stages of dive, survive, and thrive to see the actual concepts of post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic thriving, being applied in real lives. If you haven't listened to the prior episode with Dr. Mark, I really encourage you to do it because he talks about the trauma of being kicked out of medical school. Imagine, all the hard work that goes into high school and pre-med college and getting admitted into medical school, and that's being elating, and then being kicked out. That's traumatic. And yet that led to some real dynamic areas of growth. So there's post-traumatic thriving in Dr. Mark's story. So welcome, Mark, and thanks for coming back.
No, I'm glad to be back. And I know we're going to talk about the suicide documentaries. But before we get into that, since this is post-traumatic thriving, maybe we can spend a little time on a book I wrote, co-authored, Why Cope When You Can Heal. And then there was another short book, Trauma to Triumph, that I co-authored with Diana Hendel. Diana was the CEO of Long Beach Memorial Hospital when an employee of the month came in and killed his two supervisors and himself. And she led the hospital through that back to psychological and financial soundness. And then she realized she had PTSD. So she retired, resigned, at a younger age. And now she advises organizations that are going through trauma. And she was terrific. I had her on my podcast and I thought, boy, she's the real deal. And I didn't even know that I was vetting her to co-author a couple of books because HarperCollins during the pandemic said, we were thinking of you writing a couple of short books. But I would like to spend a little time on Why Cope When You Can Heal. And the subtitle was an unfortunate subtitle because it was How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD. And I think that was my fault. We should have made the title How Recovery from Trauma is Possible. Because a lot of healthcare workers, they need help. They won't reach out for it. They're like the military. They need it. They won't reach out for it. And so, and there's a lot of things in life where people need something, but they don't want it. My challenge with Just Listen, which is done pretty well around the world, it's something that the world needs to do better. And everyone says, oh, I need to be a better listener, but nobody wants to do it. But what we did cover in Why Cope When You Can Heal, and I'd like to hear your parallel input from your work, is we talked about how healthcare workers who are working in the midst of the pandemic and seeing horrific things, seeing bodies put into storage units because the morgues were full. They're not having enough protective equipment. They're going home worrying, that they're going to infect their families and living in their garage. And what we identified is the various steps that they go through, and the steps that we described in Why Cope When You Can Heal is that the trauma are these horrific scenes that you're seeing. And one of the things we talked about, the first 3 steps were horror, terror, fragile. So when you see something that's really horrific, your adrenaline's pumping and you get through it. And when you take a break from it, the terror comes in because you can't believe what you just went through. And then what happens is you start to feel fragile, like you're going to panic, but because there's so much, esprit de corps, I go back because I can't let my fellow doctors and nurses down. And so you do it day after day. And so you go through these steps of the trauma, feeling horrified by it, feeling terrified by it, feeling fragile, verging on panic. But then what happens is the adrenaline kicks in, and adrenaline helps insulate you from your thoughts and feelings and allows you to push them down to not have to deal with them because you're just trying to survive it. And then what happens is you go back, the adrenaline's pumping, you get through it. And then what happens is the danger passes. And when the danger passes, the adrenaline insulation goes away. And rather than feeling relieved, there's what we talked about, the re-traumatization avoidance. And some of the people we interviewed, they said, you know what it's like working in those hospitals during the pandemic? They said, in order to survive, it's like taking a screaming feral alley cat and tucking it and locking it into a cellar because you have to just deal with what you have to deal with. And then you take a second screaming alley cat, do the same, then 5 more, then 10 more, then 50 more. And what happens is you begin to feel almost superhuman, although you're kind of messed up inside. And then when the danger passes, it feels like all those feral alley cats that you put in the cellar, if you open the door, they're going to come screaming out and they're going to eviscerate you. They're just going to rip you apart. And so there's a fear of doing that. And so part of the pilot programs that we're establishing, more so now with the military, we'd like to do it more with healthcare, is when you can get people to share those moments, when they do it as a squad in the military or as a team who, feel messed up about it, what was the first horrific thing you saw? And they share it. When did it strike you and terrorize you? And you share it. And so what happens is when you share all these stages, that group connection elevates oxytocin. And as the group experience elevates the oxytocin, it calms down your cortisol, and you can go through all the steps and re-experience the emotions that you couldn't during the time it was happening. And by going through those steps as a team, you can feel what you didn't have the luxury of feeling, and you just share it. And then you get through it. But that's not happening. What's happening is the medical profession and the military, they don't want to mess around with those feelings. They want to get you back to the front lines. And that's part of what's contributing to the massive burnout in healthcare. That what they needed to do to survive, it's not so bad now. You don't, you have to wear masks, but you don't have to worry about the PPD shortage. What are you so messed up about? Well, because collectively, in order to survive, they pushed it all away. And what you push away wants to come out, especially since you don't have the insulation for both military and healthcare, the combination of adrenaline and testosterone. So testosterone, makes you tough. And those are great insulators of those things that you push away. That's why an NBA player can play a quarter on a broken leg. Because it pushes through. But then when the quarter's over, they can't do anything. Mm-hmm. So does that make any sense to you?
Oh, complete. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. The trauma cycle, which I think I have in chapter 1 of my book, has the diagram of the brain and the cortisol and the adrenaline. That's kind of nature's way of getting us away from the lion that's chasing us. And then and yet, if we don't complete the trauma cycle, we have these flashbacks and triggers that revisit us to that trauma as if the trauma is reoccurring. But even though we're safe, we have those episodes, and we all go through it. At least I have, with my childhood heart surgery, where I would hear a triggering word and relive the whole trauma of being an 11-year-old facing open heart surgery. And everybody else on the planet who's honest will say, I've been through similar traumas, and we got to learn how to complete the trauma cycle so that we stop getting triggered and reliving these past episodes. What you're saying makes complete sense.
When I've shared it with some of my friends in the military, and I'll send you some graphics. There's a graphic I have that says the road back from hell. And then there's a similar graphic called Save the Life of Your Child. And what the graphic shows is that when we're going through life and we get stressed, stress can make us strong. There's something called eustress. EU stress is good stress. And it's the stress that makes us, it causes us to test our mettle. It causes us to show what we're made of. And we can focus on our goals when we're stressed. But when the stress becomes distress, it crosses over into our goal becomes relieving the distress. And it's tough to hold on to the goals. And then what happens is we start to deteriorate because the things that we do to try to lessen the distress actually make it worse. Drinking, eating, whatever things. And then we descend through a series of emotional experiences, and they don't go in any particular order, but it can go anxiety, depression, panic, despair, DESPAIR. We're feeling unpaired with being able to hold on to this. And then it reaches a point, and at the bottom of these graphics, it reaches a point in both of them where it says, I want to die. And really what it is I don't want to die. I just can't get out of the pain. And for the military, when I've shared this with groups of veterans, they'll say, it's at the bottom where I'm holding a revolver to my head. And when you say, what got you through? And then there's an upside where they get through it. And a number of them will say, God. And I'll say, well, what do you mean? Were you religious? Well, not until that moment, but when I was holding a gun to my head, I just started crying, which goes against me as being in the military. And I said, God, I don't want to die, but I can't take it. God. And unfortunately, some pull the trigger, but the ones who don't will tell you that they surrendered. Mm. God helped me. And really what it was is the power of not wanting to kill themselves overrode the need for relief. But in their mind, their attachment, their own surgical empathy was God found me. And since then I've been going to church. And God heard me when I said I don't want to. And what happened is they experienced surrendering to God. It's not unlike the 12-step program. I surrender to my higher power because I can't fight my addiction. It's ruined my life. I'm divorced. I've lost my job, and so you surrender to some higher power, whatever you call it. And it's the act of surrendering that then allows you to fall apart and start to come back together again. I think one of the ways that psychedelics work is when you do psychedelics in a therapeutic setting, you're clearly giving up control. I mean, you're out of it, and you have a shaman or a therapist who walks you through it and says, no, it's okay to throw up. It's okay to vomit. It's okay to have diarrhea. It's all part of it. And what happens is you let go of control because it's taken away from you by the psychedelics. But then what happens is your brain and your mind start to reconstitute. One of the metaphors that people have used, it's like a Rubik's Cube. And, all your life you've been solving the Rubik's Cube to match what it looks like in the wrapper. But then when things become too much, and when you try to get it back into the wrapper, that just doesn't work anymore. Well, that's because your reality is different than when you bought the Rubik's Cube. And what psychedelics do is they just spin the heck out of the Rubik's Cube and it gets solved, but it looks different. It's not the way it looked in the wrapper, but what happens is it gets solved to face your life the way it is now. So you fall apart and then you come together and you have a shaman or a therapist guiding you through that because they know that you will come together and you see things in a different way. And it's interesting when I've shared that with some military, the road back from hell. One of them is a friend of mine. He helped with he's a colonel. He helped with the hurricane rebuilding in Puerto Rico. And when I showed this graphic to him, and I'll send it along to you, you can, put it up wherever you want.
Yeah.
He started crying and smiling, crying and smiling. And I said, what's going on? He said, I'm crying because I'm reliving the traumas. I'm reliving all those traumas, as we go through all those steps. I'm getting flashbacks and I'm crying. And I said, well, what are you smiling about? And he introduced the concept that I think you'll like. I like it. He said, what you've provided is a sense of coherence. And I said, what the heck is sense of coherence? And he said, when your mind is really whacked out and you're confused and, you just feel kind of crazy, a sense of coherence is when you see something or you hear something and it helps make what is crazy comprehensible and understandable. When something he said, when you walked me through the road back from hell, it was like a bracelet connecting all the charms. There's a journey that I'm going through all the way to the down point of I want to die. And he said, so when there's a combination of making something understandable, it becomes manageable. And he said, what I thought when I watched this was, sense can be made out of this nonsense. So since sense can be made out of it, it's manageable. And then the third component in a sense of coherence is it needs to be personally meaningful. And there are few things more meaningful than you helped my whacked out mind make sense. And that's called a sense of coherence. And in fact, I'm guessing from our prior episode, and maybe a little bit from this episode, that you're experiencing some senses of coherence. it's validating what you know, but hopefully some of it that's fresh is saying, I never looked at it that way, but that makes it so understandable.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I'm kind of interpreting what you're saying, Mark, is that when you learn something, and let's say you're learning something that society or your home environment taught you that's flawed, the research shows that it takes 27 exposures to the new information before it really rewires the neurology of the brain. Now, I don't know if it's 27% times or 25 or 35, but the point is that you need to hear that information from different perspectives to rewire the old thinking. And I think what you bring to the table is these new perspectives that help rewire the neurology from the things that society has taught us that maybe have since been improved. That's the way I see it. And the other thought that comes to mind is, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from folks as we're talking through post-traumatic thriving concepts, the sense of relief that, hey, their depression, their anger, the denial, their shock, the physiology of being in shock, the triggers, it's all normal. This is all normal behavior. There's nothing crazy or wrong with you or me or anybody who's been through a trauma and wondering, questioning our own sanity, because what we've been through is just so out of bounds. And just a sense of relief that, hey, what we experienced was completely not only normal, it was nature's way of protecting us from being overloaded and overcome by the trauma and protecting us in stages. So that's a couple of thoughts that have kind of come through as you've shared. But talk a little bit more. I'm very curious about your project with the schools and the high schools and how you're taking all your, I don't know about all your information, but the appropriate components of your research and making it presentation friendly for the high schools.
Oh, thank you. So I'm involved with two documentaries. One is called Stay Alive, an intimate conversation about suicide prevention. And I'm a co-creator and a moderator, and I interviewed two people. One of them is Kevin Hines. Kevin Hines jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. Mm-hmm. And he's been on, he's wonderful. And he's this inspirational person who tells a story about jumping off and what he learned, what he wished people had done, how he wished people had connected with him. He's also one of the champions of putting nets up on the Golden Gate Bridge. So they're putting nets now to catch people when they jump. And it's a multi-million-dollar project. But, the Golden Gate Bridge, someone gave me this crazy statistic. I think it was Kevin. He said that at least one person a week jumps off the Golden Gate Bridge, but they are swept out to sea. So it's not a rare occasion.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
And he's one of a handful that have survived. So Stay Alive is it's an interview with him and a Japanese young woman pop star, because there's a lot of suicide in the Asian cultures.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned, I think in the last episode, I was part of another documentary called Tell My Story, and I'll go into it a little bit, because what happened is Jason Reed, I guess he found out that I knew something about suicide, and his story, which is a TEDx. He has a TEDx, which is, I think it's what every parent needs to know about their kid. And then he did a Goalcast video, which has been seen by about 12 million people, where he spoke to male entrepreneurs about what he missed. And also what he shared is that we don't open up to our children. We don't want to burden them. We're supposed to be strong. But what happens is we can have a vulnerable child who feels like there's something wrong with them if they're weak. Because since we don't open up to them because we don't want to burden them, but when they think that we're strong and they're not, they often can't connect to us. And that's what happened with his son. And as the story goes, he was on vacation in Mexico with his wife, celebrating just how wonderful their life was. And he gets a text message from 14-year-old Ryan. And the text message says, don't blame yourself. I'm sorry. Goodbye. And he started screaming, and he called his mother-in-law who was staying at the house, and he screams at her, go find Ryan. And she runs around the house and she goes up into the attic, and he hung himself. So then the story of getting back from Mexico and the story of, waiting until, his brain dead son until they declared him dead. It was just horrific. And so that's why he created this documentary, Tell My Story, in which he spoke to experts like me. He spoke to teenagers. He spoke to parents. But then what he created out of that afterwards is this other vehicle called What I Wish My Parents Knew. And as I said, I've been looking for 25 years for something that would help parents and teenagers emotionally connect. And I think this is it. Because what happens is when you hear these teenagers calmly talking about their low point, and again, it's not about suicide, and we kept that out of it because it's too scary. Parents will talk about, I'm worried about my child and their mental health. It's just too scary to talk about suicide. People just run for the hills.
Yeah.
So these teenagers talk about their low points and how they didn't open up to anyone. And I believe, and it's my calling card. So I've reached out to various organizations, and even when I do my podcast, I'll have guests on and I'll say, do you have any kids? Are you worried about your kids? Or do you know anybody who's worried about their kids? And then I'll show them the trailer for What I Wish My Parents Knew. And they immediately realize that's my kid. I mean, what that kid is going through is my kid. Mm-hmm. I remember one powerful CEO I showed it to, and he said, I can't do the podcast now. And I said, why? He said, one of those kids is exactly like my kid, and we're doing it all wrong. And I said, oh, I didn't mean to depress you. And he said, no. I feel wonderful because I'm going to show this to my wife because we're approaching it all wrong. So I'm very excited about that. And our hope is to have this shown in high schools and junior highs with or without the teenagers. And Jason and I will do some of the presentations, but, we can't be present for all of them. And Jason has created a wonderful site called tellmystory.org, where there's all kinds of resources, tellmystory.org, because that was one of the suicide notes of his son. And so we're hoping to roll this out. Schools will see it, and they'll bring in someone, maybe a mental health practitioner, but someone to facilitate the conversation. So what are you hearing from these teens? What's going on? And then, because one of the things that Jason and I believe, and the program that we're offering is called Own the Mental Health of Your Child. Because you'd own the physical health, you take them to the doctor, and he said, therapists and psychiatrists are few and far between. There's a huge shortage. 90% of America can't afford them. And so our belief is that it's going to be up to the parents to find a way to reach their kids and help them through it. So that's why I'm very excited about this.
Well, and for right reasons, because that's just huge. It's kind of the theme of, I saw it back when I worked on the O.J. Simpson case, where Denise Brown and Tanya Brown and the Brown family took this ugly topic of domestic violence. And I mean, let's face it, who wants to really talk about that stuff? And made it, brought that conversation into mainstream living rooms. And that's saved untold numbers of lives. And I see what you're doing is the same thing. Who wants to talk about teenage suicide? That's so depressing, just the term, let alone really getting into it. But bringing the conversation into the high schools, because that's how we deal with stuff. The old school, let's forget about it, let's repress it, let's pretend it never happened, let's put a happy face on, let's smear lipstick on the pig. That approach just doesn't work, and we've learned that, I think, sometimes the hard way. When do you think this is going to make its way into the? Do you have a timeline to share on that project? What?
Yeah, the project, we've launched it, and I'm an executive producer, and maybe I'm being oversensitive, but I'm very protective of these teens. Because and I'm going to push for it to not be ever on Netflix or YouTube, because Jason will tell you he doesn't know what depression is. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's never been depressed. When he tells the story in front of groups, he cries because he relives the moment. I mean, he shares it, but he doesn't know what depression is, and I feel protective of these teens. And I say, the haters will find them. Haters love vulnerability. There'll be comments that say, why don't you kill yourself? You're such a loser. So something I'd like to propose, and you can do this because this is available. I'm going to put in the chat the trailer, and why don't you play it so they can hear it and they can see it? It's 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Could you do that?
Yeah.
My kid, he'll be fine. He just needs to toughen up.
Honey, it's your first crush. There'll be others. Just get over it.
You go talk to her. She's just gonna yell at me again. Besides, she'll cool off by morning.
You don't want to eat? Fine. Starve yourself.
Those other kids are just playing around. You just need to loosen up.
It's all a little fuzzy on what was going through my head at that time. I honestly don't really remember. It's very fuzzy to me, but I just remember I was just upset, angry, and just done. And I guess it all just kind of built up to that moment.
So somehow in your head you thought being dead was better than being alive?
Correct.
I felt like I wasn't supposed to cry. I felt like I wasn't supposed to tell people how I was feeling. I felt like that was weakness. So what I did instead is I tried to show strength by never crying, by bottling everything up, by making sure that nobody knew how I felt. That was my sole goal, because I didn't want to be a burden to anyone else.
I think I held in a lot of what I was going through. I would share with people my external life circumstances. I would say, yeah, my dad's going through a hard time, or things are difficult at home. But I would never tell people the extent to which I felt internally, or what thoughts I was getting.
Camera 3.
So when I was 7 and 8, I would say that's when I first realized that something with me was different than what I was told to believe. And I started having a lot of self-hate roll in because I thought I was something wrong. I thought I was something out of my control. I knew it was something out of my control, so because of that I was wrong and basically just not a human. in ways.
I don't feel like there's one exact point, but once I started getting closer with my friends, because when all of this was happening, I wasn't talking to anyone. I was just kind of distancing myself. I wasn't going out, hanging out, going to play basketball at the park, nothing. So I feel like once I started making an effort to be around people that I knew liked me, I guess, I feel like once I was around them and I was happy and I felt safe, I feel like that was a turning point that I realized that I kind of matter.
So the release date is it's available now for high schools and junior highs. As I said, I'm going to do my best to keep it off of general release because I could be oversensitive, but I just know that haters love vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's a sad state, and these kids seem to be doing okay, but that doesn't mean that they're immune to having all kinds of comments and everything. And I don't want to subject them to it, so I'm being protective of it. What I do hope is that people who watch this will reach out to me or to you if they have a high school or junior high where they would like the program. And one of the things that I offer is after we show the video, Jason will talk about the signs that he missed, that he wished he hadn't. And then he turns it over to me and I'll give some tactics and tips about how to reach someone you're worried about. And there's a series of 4 prompts that people seem to like. So I'm going to share those now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a parent and you're worried about your kid, your teenager, or your 20-something child, this is the script. You can modify it a little bit. And you do this while you're doing an activity. Teens hate heart-to-heart talks that they don't initiate. I mean, it is nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
And so you can do this when you're driving or doing an errand or something. And the script goes something like this. Honey, a lot of us parents are worried about our teens. We're worried with the pandemic, the schools being shut down, open up and all that. Worried about all the stuff in the news, about all the violence and all this stuff. Worried about the internet, all the social media. And I'm one of those parents. Can I, just so I can feel a little bit at ease, can I run some things by you? So hopefully they'll say, okay, Mom, okay, Dad. And so there's 4 prompts. And the first one is, at its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they're going to go, what? And you say, yeah, at its worst, how awful can it feel about your life or yourself? And they might say, oh, pretty awful. And so here's a little mini surgical empathy. Pretty awful or very awful? Okay, very awful. And you get them to talk about it because you're wanting to help them get it off their chest. Second prompt, when you're feeling this way, how alone do you feel with it? Pretty alone. Pretty alone or very alone? Okay, Dad. Okay, Mom. Very alone. Tell me about what that's like. Third prompt, take me to the last time you felt like this. And they're going to go, what? Or WTF? And you could say, yeah, was it when you were walking? We heard you walking around in your bedroom at 2 a.m. a few nights ago, or when we snapped at each other, you snapped at me and I snapped at you in the car. When was it? And here's an interesting thing that happens, that when you can get someone to tell you so clearly about such an episode and you can see it with your eyes, they re-feel it. Yeah, I was walking around. It was the middle of the night. And what was going on? Well, I had this test and I couldn't sleep. Oh, what'd you do? Well, I walked around because I couldn't sleep. So what'd you do next? I felt like punching the wall, kicking the wall. What'd you do after that? Well, I looked for some cough medicine or some of your sleeping pills, which you've done a good job of hiding. Couldn't find them. Then what happened? The sun rose and I felt a little better. And then the fourth prompt, if you're fortunate, you will have earned the right to eye contact. And you say, look at me. And they'll look at you. And you say, I have a favor to ask you. And it's a little more than a favor, but we'll keep it as a favor. Next time you're feeling that way, or you're even heading in that direction, I want you to do whatever it takes to get your dad or your mom or my undivided attention. Because we got a million things in our mind. But there's nothing more important to your mom or your dad or me than helping you feel a little bit less alone when you're feeling that awful. So would you do me that favor? So can you see how that could lead into something?
Oh, yeah.
And then, by the way, if you're listening in, parents, your goal is not to make them cry. Your goal is to let them cry. Because if they cry, it's out of relief that they're getting this up and out, that they're feeling less alone, that they're getting some oxytocin in their system to counteract their high cortisol. So if they cry, don't panic and say, oh, it'll be okay. It's good. They're crying with relief.
I love that. I actually was studying this graphic, and I got notes all over it. But if it's okay with you, we'll post it.
Oh yeah,
yeah. That's just brilliant. That's just absolutely brilliant. I know it's not on Netflix, but I'd love to watch those videos because I think.
No, I'll send you the link. You can share it with your spouse. But again, I'm the protector of it.
Yeah, I get it. You know, I've studied disasters, as you know, around the world, and there's when these things happen, it's just astounding to hear the conspiracy theories and the Satan worship and the haters and the bullies. I have kind of a worldview that there's predators and preys and principled people, PPP. Mm-hmm. And when people are prey or victims of predators or whatever has happened, the predators feel emboldened, and those of us who like to think we have some principles need to step up and prevent that. So I see that as what you're doing. I totally get that. Well, I'm excited about that. The next topic, Mark, I wanted to talk to you about is that we haven't gotten into yet, and that's your hostage negotiation work. And I'm guessing that some of these same concepts apply where you listen to the, speaking of predators, you listen to the demands of whoever you're talking to. But can you kind of walk us through that? What that's all about with your work there?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I'm going to share some stories that I'm not even sure I've shared before. Kind of like the 3 listening things. One of my mentors was a fellow named Dr. Ed Schneidman. He was a specialist in suicide prevention at one of the pioneers in the field. He was at UCLA. Mm-hmm. And he used to do a course called Death and Suicide. It was an upper division undergraduate course. And he did it for 20 years. And he was a mentor of mine. And he had guest lecturers, coroners, police officers. And I was a guest lecturer for 10, 12 years. And he told me that my lecture was always the highest rated. And I can send you a video clip, because what I would do is I'd do a role play in which I'd come in there. And so imagine 250 undergraduate students. Mm. I'd take off my coat and I'd say, I'm going to leave being Dr. Goulston. I'm going to become Jack. And they would watch me sort of transform myself. I had a sport jacket off and I'd change into a t-shirt. I may have slicked my hair back. And then I became this suicidal teenager. And I transformed. I became very dark. And I would basically say, I'm a loser. I've never achieved what any of you have achieved. And I've had it. And this is my last shot. And if you don't talk me out of it, I'm gone. And then I dump a bunch of pills on the podium. And then I say, I can't do anything right. That's just going to constipate me. And they all laugh. And then I say, but I think this will work. And then I loosen my grip and a gun falls out and I cock it. And I say, I think this will work. And unless you talk me out of it, I'm gone and you can still get an A in the course. Don't worry about that. I mean, I'm sarcastic and whatever. And no matter what they do, I just slam them down. And there's a video clip on YouTube. It's from the 90s. And some guy walks up to me and he's showing empathy. Oh, Jack, I understand. And I know you're in a lot of pain. And then he walks up, and this is all in the video. And, and the gun's on the table, and he grabs the gun, and everybody applauds. And then I said, Jack, even suicidal people have hobbies, and I collect guns. And that's my smallest one. I'm not so crazy to bring in a bigger one to UCLA. But anyway, and then I would then flip it to, this is what you didn't say to me. This is what you didn't ask that would have made me turn over my gun. Mm-hmm. And this became a signature presentation and maybe something that you might, help me get into the prisons, because after this, I did a presentation at the federal penitentiary in San Pedro. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I role played being their younger brother. And this was to prisoners who were going to be discharged in the next year to 16 months. And that role play was rebuilding the trust in your family after you've done this to them. And I was just vicious. I told them, you love our family, you get out of here, you move. Because mom's going to give you multiple chances because she believes in Jesus. But you and I know that all you're ever going to be is a lying sack of blah, 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 blah. And if you say, I should respect you, I've been lifting weights too, and I'll put your head through the frickin' wall. And so I got them all agitated, and they're there with their Bibles because the chaplains arranged this. And then it would reach a point where they would say, get this guy away from me. And I'm there, I'm right in their face. And then I stop and I say, this is what you could say to your brother that would talk him down and get him to actually be supportive of you. And then I did that. So how did I get into hostage negotiation training? So I was co-presenting with someone from the FBI to a group of middle school parents, at a private school, so overprotective. And my FBI friend talked about all the dangers and what the parents needed to look out for. And so I did a presentation called It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want to. Mm. And then I role played being their spoiled, protected kid who is going to go to a party. And yes, there'll be drugs there. Yes, there'll be gangs there. And you're not going to call the other parents. And then I just took on all the parents, and then again, I told them what they could do to get through to their child. And then Brent Braun from the FBI, he said, "You're doing this in a bunch of settings. Could you do a training for FBI and police hostage negotiators?" And so then I started doing trainings with them, in which, and I have a video clip on this, in which I take off my jacket. And these are FBI and police hostage negotiators. And underneath my jacket, I have a police uniform on. I haven't shaved for a week. I think I have glasses on that are broken. And I say, "I'm the guy in the department who shot the kid with the plastic gun last year. I've been on medical leave for a year." And then I pull out a gun, which they told me to paint red, because they say they're a little jumpy if they see a real gun, so I got a fake one. And I said, "I've been on medical leave for a year." And then I cock the gun and I say, "And if you don't talk me out of it, I'm going on permanent leave. And then you live with the ghost of someone you couldn't protect, just like I have. And no matter what they did, I pulled the trigger." And then I say, "This is what you could have said to me to get me to give up the gun. And this time it's one of your own." So I did that several times. And again, it got like the highest ratings in an all-day training, and then when I would go along with some ride-alongs, and I would, coach some of the police and FBI hostage negotiators about how do you get through to some of these people. Now, again, the people I was talking about were not terrorists. They were people who were agitated. Mm. So my training was, how do you get an emotional person to calm down? Mm-hmm. And in my book, Just Listen, we actually talk about one of the anecdotes where someone who was trained by me was coaching the frontline negotiator. And the episode that we talk about in Just Listen is a guy had pulled into a parking lot. So this particular episode, he didn't have a hostage, but he had a gun, and he was gonna blow himself away. And so the SWAT teams called in, and they're hiding behind cars. They don't want to agitate him. But, if he aims the gun at any place other than himself, they're going to take him out.
Yeah.
And so the person who's the lead negotiator is being fed things that he can try from someone who was trained by me. And one of the things we talked about was something called the magic paradox. And in this particular episode that we described, the magic paradox was something like, what this backup negotiator said to the lead negotiator is, say this to the person, because they were finding out information, what had happened, what had driven this person to this. And the magic paradox worked like this. I'll bet you feel that nobody knows what it's like to be you. And nothing's worked out, and this is your only option. Isn't that true? And the person comes back and says, "Yeah, you're right. Nobody knows what it's like, and nobody gives a flying." But then you're in. It's the paradox of it. Yes, you're right. Nobody understands. Well, you're understanding them. You're creating a little bit of hostage oxytocin. And you can say, and I'll bet you're feeling that everything you touch blows up in your face, and you just can't take it anymore. Is that true? Yeah, you're right. Everything's a mess, blah, 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 blah. But maybe you're getting the point that when you create this bridge, they're starting to calm down. And so you lead them into that direction, and And there were other kinds of things. But again, it was for it. I'm not a negotiator when you're dealing with a terrorist doing such and such. It has to be something where they're emotionally driven to this, and then I could be of some assistance.
Wow. So what I kind of see, correct me if I'm wrong, is you've taken this body of research that you've developed over a long period of time and kind of repurposed it for yet another application. Am I getting that right?
Oh yeah. It's there's lots of applications. I'll give you a little comic relief. This will make you chuckle. Okay.
Yeah. I'm ready.
Parents really chuckle at this. In fact, I did an interview this morning, and the husband and wife just started laughing, and the wife said, "I'm going to try that with our teenager this afternoon." And it's using reverse psychology. So another term for that is what I call mediated catharsis. And basically what you're doing is a Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope. You're getting your teenager to punch themselves out, because one of the things that drives teenagers a little bit crazy, and their parents, is teenagers have a lot of rage and they don't know where it's coming from. And the level of rage is scary. I mean, they will say to their parents, "I said, leave me the F alone." And it's chilling. What happens is parents back off. And the teenagers don't even know where it's coming from. And it's all these factors, the internet, it's puberty, it's who knows what. So what I did this morning, what I suggested to the mother is, because her teenager is not doing his homework, it's junior year, it's the most important thing, and he's blowing it off, and he's going to ruin his life, and blah, 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 blah. I said, what I'd like you to do is go knock on your teenager's door and say, "Honey, it's Mom." "What?" "Can I come in?" "What?" "Yeah, I want to talk to you about the homework situation. Maybe it'll make it better." "I don't want to talk about it." "Can you just let me in? I just want to try something, and then you can throw me out." "Okay." So then you go in there and you look at your son, who has a lot of rage, like a lot of teenagers, that scares both parties and doesn't have an outlet. And you say to your son, "Can you repeat this back to me and try to lean into it, if it feels right? Yeah, could you say this to me? But I want you to lean into it, try to act." "Mom, get off my effing back with the homework. You come in here, you try to get me to do my homework, it makes it even worse. In fact, if you don't get off my back, I'm going to go right to video games and maybe try a little bit of porn. So can you get off my back already? You're so effing clueless. Why don't you go talk to Dad, who I don't have any relationship with? So Mom, can you just do that, please? So honey, could you say that to me?" So what happens is you goad your teenager into saying those things, which he or she could never say, because you'd say, "You need a timeout." But what you're doing is you're mediating the catharsis. And so he says that. And you say, "Come on, you can do better than that. You're holding back." And you just goad him to say all this sort of stuff. Yeah, tell me how stupid and clueless I am. Come on, lean into that. And what happens, not in all cases, and you're smiling because you're sort of following this crazy thing, teens will start to giggle because you're enabling them to get the rage out that scares them. And what happens is you can get playful to the point where it's ridiculous and you're not going to punish them. And what happens, can't guarantee it, but after they do that and they're giggling with relief, a certain number of them are going to just feel so grateful and appreciative that you somehow found a way to help them get their rage out. And they're going to show their appreciation and gratitude by doing their homework. I thought you'd chuckle.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Never thought of that one before. I'll tell you.
I never saw that one coming, he says.
Well, the thing is, as you're telling that story, I'm just going, I think this is going a direction where I'm going to realize how many mistakes I made as a parent. But oh well. Wow, that's ingenious. So what are you in a mode now with your career and your life and everything where you're basically getting the word out on things you've already developed, or are you in the midst of developing more of this brilliant stuff?
Well, I won't go into details, but I have some health challenges.
Mm.
And I expect to be around for a while. But it's given me a sense of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my stuff, I've never been able to get it through because it's not evidence-based. The evidence is I have a pretty good track record.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, get this, professors in depression and suicide have referred their children to me, and I say, are you interested in what I do? And they say, if it's not evidence-based and you don't have a control group, we can't look at it. But why are you sending me your kid? Send him to the university. And I'm telling you, it's like they have a chip missing. They say, well, we don't have your track record. Well, aren't you interested? And it's like, we can't look at it if it's not evidence-based and you don't have a control group. So yeah. What I defaulted to for decades is send me your kid. But, it appears that I have some body of knowledge that might be able to help somewhere. And so I'm looking for avenues to just share what I know. And, it's not for everyone. And there's going to be some people who listen and watch this say, oh, I would never try that thing with my teenager in junior high school, in high school. And there's going to be other listeners who are chomping at the bit. I'm going to use this tonight. So what it is I've always had a counterintuitive approach to life. Like I was involved with the O.J. Simpson trial. I was an advisor to the prosecution. And one of the reasons I got in is I knew Gil Garcetti, who was the DA at the time. And I sent him a note and I said, I don't really know that much about juries, but if you're going to get a mainly black jury downtown, a couple of things I might want to ask them is, have you ever changed your mind about the way you feel about someone? Because if they didn't change their mind about a black abusive dad, they're not going to change their mind about O.J. Simpson. So you want people that are capable of changing their mind. And then the second question is, what made you change your mind? If it's the facts, you better have a lot of great evidence. But if it turns out it's emotion, you better have an emotional case. And he spoke with Marcia Clark and Bill Hodgman, who was there before Christopher Darden. And then he came back to me and he said, we never would have thought of that ever. You want to come in when your schedule allows, you can sit in the courtroom. And we're not going to have you in our strategy team because we just want you to feed us with these off-the-wall things. And we can't even tell you when we're going to use them. But occasionally, one of the prosecutors would say, you might want to watch the trial tomorrow. Because I they might use some of my things. Like one of the things they use, and this is the way my crazy mind works. I said, when the jury goes into deliberation, they're out of your control. So how do you control a jury in a double murder case? And I said, this is how I think. You haunt them. And what would be more haunting than playing the 911 tapes of Nicole Brown Simpson naming O.J. Simpson when he tried to break into the back of her townhouse? So I said, Marsha, when you're doing the closing argument, everyone is kind of, I wouldn't use the term then, everyone is burned out on the trial. And you might want to remind the jury what's going on and just play the voice of the person who got murdered, telling you who killed her. And so they use that because, that was kind of neat. They wouldn't have thought of that necessarily. So, it's interesting. I see the elephant in the room, and sometimes I can't see what's obvious. I remember I was seeing a black male patient years ago. And, and after a few weeks, I must have said something. And he said to me, Mark, I'm black. And I didn't know he was black. Because what I told you is I tune into pain. And all I'm listening for is, where does it hurt? How much does it hurt? How much time do we have before they do something destructive? That's all I'm tuning into. So I just want to share, some of what I've learned with the world, and hopefully some people will find it helpful, useful. Maybe some people find it entertaining. The haters will come after me.
They always do. There's a thing out there that says when you're outstanding, you stand out. And when you stand out, you're going to get pounded with somebody's hammer. And that just comes with the territory of doing something brilliant. And I think the research and work you've done is just nothing short of brilliant. It's just adding these really dynamic dimensions to a already well-developed conglomeration of science and art. And I love it. It's hard for me, having researched this topic for 15 years and writing this book, to come across new material that I haven't heard before, but you're delivering it in truckloads. So for that, I'm very grateful. And I'm going to, like I say, I'm a big fan, and we're going to invite you back on to talk about each of your books, because there's just so many layers of great additional information. Any parting words before we sign off on today's episode, Mark?
Well, you've tolerated my talking in tangents. So here's a tangent that, I don't know, I'm just going to say it. I collect quotes. I have a few that aren't half bad, but I love great quotes. And my favorite quote comes from a woman named Dr. Shani Duperon. And she co-founded with Desmond Tutu Project Forgive. And it was nominated for a Nobel Prize some years ago. And her quote was, and you're going to want to write this one down, "Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive." It knocked all the other quotes, and I got some doozies. It knocked all the other ones off the table. And as soon as she told me that, I was in my car and I pulled over and I thought of my father who had died in 1995. So this would have been I don't know, probably 20, 23 years after he died. And I imagine this apology from him, because my dad could be a little bit on the critical side. You know, he was raised in the Depression. He was a good guy, but he could be really critical. And one of the things he would say to me, because I am a little bit wacko, and he was good with numbers. So I think I reminded him of his boss, who was a little bit wacko too. So he couldn't really say this to his boss. But whenever I'd come up with a wacko idea, he'd say, "What makes you think you know anything about anything?" Really dismissive, really critical. So this was the apology I imagined he gave me. Mark, remember when I used to say, "What makes you think you know anything about anything?" I was talking about myself. I was good with numbers. Really good with numbers. But there's a lot of things I wasn't that good with. I wasn't that good getting close to you or your brothers. I wasn't that good getting close to your mom. And I'm sorry for my saying that to you, because what you've done with your life, the lives you've touched, the lives you've saved, I don't deserve you as my son. And I'm sorry. And I know he would say that to me, but here's what I discovered. Is the full apology meant that I owed him one. So again, he's dead 20 plus years. And I said, "Dad, I accept your apology and I need to apologize to you. Because look, I'm the psychiatrist in the family. I should have understood this stuff. And I've been holding a grudge against you forever. I've had a chip on my shoulder towards you. And you did the best you could. You weren't that supportive, but you really didn't beat us or anything. And you weren't an alcoholic, and you didn't cheat on mom. And you really did a lot of great things, which I haven't remembered. And I apologize to you. And I can finally say the 6 words that I haven't been able to say in 20 years. I miss you. I love you. So I know that's a tangent, but I thought you'd be okay with it.
I love your tangents, Mark. They're just brilliant. And thank you again for sharing your time. We're talking with Dr. Mark Goulston, who is a preeminent psychiatrist, taught as a professor at UCLA, and now has ideas coming off like popcorn that are just really worth sitting up straight and paying attention to. So I want to thank you again, Mark, for coming on. We're going to have you back to the extent you're willing. And if anything's been accomplished, it's that I've already been researching your work, and I just want to delve in further because the world needs to sit up and pay attention to your messages. So thanks again, and we will see everybody next time on another episode of Post-Traumatic Thriving.
Thanks for supporting our podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on your favorite social media. For books, merchandise, or to donate, visit CoreIQ.com. Post-Traumatic Thriving is produced by CoreIQ, a nonprofit with a mission to teach the skills we all need but are not taught in school. CoreIQ and the Post-Traumatic Thriving podcast are for informational purposes only and do not provide medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your licensed medical and mental health care providers.